Welcome to I believe this is the fourth session of SMI Academy, in which we will be discussing the concepts of data selections, data contexts, and universes. Whereas the previous sessions have focused more on the front end of SMI, mostly the business objects piece, we're now going to be talking more about the administrative or administration tasks that go along with the SMI application. So without further ado, let's begin. There we go. Okay, so what is SMI Data Designer? Well, I should start by saying that Data Designer is the new name for what was previously called Report Enterprise Manager. So those of you who have been working with SMI for a while now, or maybe just recently got into it, in your environments, the application is still going to be called Report Enterprise Manager, but going forward, we're going to rename it Data Designer. We think the name is a little more descriptive of what the application does. So what is it? Well, at a very high level, it is the central application through which all changes to the reporting model are made. So everyone here who has done some administration of SMI probably has seen this application, and you may be familiar with it to some degree. Maybe you kind of understand what you're doing, but some of the concepts are a little unclear, so that's why we're doing this now. So it is, again, the central application through which all the changes to the model are made. So, mapping fields, renaming fields, things that will, change the experience for the end user, the report developer. Data Designer understands the source database structure and allows modifications to be made with an intuitive graphical user interface. So rather than having to know specifically the table and the column that you're looking for in your source application, whether it's Service Manager, Asset Manager, Remedy, ServiceNow, etc., Data Designer will analyze the source database and catalog everything that's in there, all the tables and columns that are available, and then allow the administrator of the SMI solution to modify the model, in other words, add fields, rename fields, etc., through a graphical user interface. So instead of having to type in, for instance, a table name and a column name, you simply find the table from a list of available tables and then find the column from a list of available columns. These are concepts we'll see a little later on in the scenario that I've put together. Another thing that Data Designer does is it updates all of SMI's moving parts automatically based on the model defined within itself. So not only are you using Data Designer to basically configure the model and make it fit your needs or the needs of your report developers, but Data Designer will also make those changes live. So instead of you or the administrator having to manually update the various parts of SMI, such as the reporting database and the the universes, you don't have to interact with those directly. Once you've made the selections that you want in Data Designer, it will update those quote-unquote moving parts for you. And lastly, with the introduction of SMI 12, Data Designer is now capable of maintaining several reporting models based on different source applications. So with SMI 2011, of course, it supports HP Service Manager only. With SMI 12, we can connect to any source database that's on Oracle, DB2, or SQL Server, and we have fully fledged solutions, and by solution I mean a set of universes and startup reports for applications like Service Manager, Asset Manager, HP Project and Portfolio Manager, BMC Remedy, and others to come. UCMDB, I believe, is one of the ones on that list. So now the question becomes, okay, well, what exactly are the moving parts of SMI? So here is a very simple diagram of what an SMI installation looks like. Just going from left to right here, of course, we have our source database. This would be either your service manager database, your asset manager database, etc. Whatever the application is that we are reporting on, this is its database. This here in the center is the SMI reporting database. So this is one of the moving parts. This is something that Data Designer is responsible for maintaining. And this, of course, is the database that we load all of the data from the source database into for reporting purposes. And it is loaded and maintained by another moving part, the ETL, which we see right here. So this is the process by which we are loading all of the changes found in the source database into the SMI database. The ETL is also responsible for calculated fields as well. So if you have any calculations that are being done at the ETL level and then stored in the SMI database, obviously this is the piece that's responsible for that. Then, of course, on top of the SMI reporting database, we have the universes, which are represented here. And the universes allow us to interact with the SMI database easily without the technical knowledge, without having to understand the tables and those things, columns and joins and all that. That's all built into the universes so that you can simply, pick the objects that you want from the universe and put them in your report. And then, of course, finally, we have the reports. So of all the pieces that we see here, those that are maintained by SMI Data Designer are shown there in the gray area. So we never have to manually update the ETL, the database, or the SMI universes. That's all handled by Data Designer. Of course, it doesn't update the source database, but it knows everything it needs to know about the source database. So it's not in the gray box because it doesn't change the source database, but it does know everything it needs to about the source database. And of course, the reports are outside the scope of Data Designer. Those are handled completely within business objects. Okay, so what are the components that we find within Data Designer? So now we know what Data Designer is responsible for maintaining, but when we work within Data Designer, there are three different types of objects within the application that we use to define the model. The first of those three is called a data selection, and a data selection is basically a reference to a table in the source database, and it allows for the selection of fields to be included in the model. So for instance, if you have you would have a data selection on the table that holds incidents in Service Manager, and then within that data selection you would choose the incident fields that you want to be in your SMI model. The data selection also determines how the table and column architecture of the SMI reporting database will look and how the ETL will look. So if you think back to what we saw on the last slide, anything you change in the data selection is going to potentially affect the ETL and the reporting database, but it will not have any effect on universes. That brings us to the next object within Data Designer, which is the universe object. And the universe object is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a representation of the final business object universe that will be generated by Data Designer. Every universe is related to one and only one data selection. So if the incident universe, for instance, is going to be related to the incident data selection, and it cannot be directly related to any other data selection. So that brings us to the third piece, which is what we call the data context. Now, the data context is, I think, of the three, it is the most abstract and the one that I think most of the people that I've worked with in the administration training have the hardest time understanding. And that doesn't mean that it's difficult to understand. It just means that compared to the universe and the data selection, it's a little more, it's a bit of a higher concept, I guess you could say. So a data context is a set of fields from a data selection that is inserted into a universe to add related data. So if you think back to what I just said about the universe, how it can only be related to one data selection, well, obviously we want to be able to include data from multiple data selections or multiple tables from the source database in a single universe. And so we achieve this through the data context. So what we can do is we can build a data context on top of another data selection and then pull that data context into the universe and relate the data from the data context to the universe. So that's what allows us to bring in that supporting data, like the operator data and the assignment group data, and even data from other main entities. So of course we have in Service Manager, in the incident universe, you would be able to find related interactions. That's achieved through the inclusion of a data context in the incident universe in Data Designer. So let's look at a quick diagram of how this all comes together. We start here with the universe itself. There it is, represented by the large orange circle. And then we start to bring in our various pieces to build up this universe. So of course the first thing we have is a data selection. And as I said, we only get one data selection per universe. So again, with the incident example, we could imagine that blue data selection is the incident data selection that we've included into the universe. But now we want to include, again, some operator data. We want more information about the person who opened or closed the incident or updated the incident or who it's assigned to. Those are all references to operators in Service Manager. So we want to see more information about those people, which means we need the data from the operator table. Since we can only have one data selection in the universe, we have a data context that's attached to the operator data selection, and we bring that in. So that's how we bring in that other data, not through another data selection, but through a data context. And of course, we can have many data contexts included. You're not limited to just one. And you're not limited to using a single data context only once. There's many instances in our solutions for SMI where a single data context is used multiple times throughout many universes. There's no limit on how many times a single data context can be reused. And of course, this makes maintaining the solution much easier, because chances are whenever you want, for instance, operator data, you always want the same set of fields. I want the full name, I want the email address, I want the phone number, and whatever else. And every time I need operator data, I want those fields. So I create that one data context, and then I can reuse that over and over throughout the universes. What's even nicer about that is that if you make a change to that data context, that change gets applied everywhere it's been used. So if a decision is made that we now need a new piece of data for all references to operators, I make that change once. And if I've used that data context in 50 different places, all 50 instances of it now get updated. So instead of having to make 50 changes to the universe, I make one change, and Data Designer just replicates that change for every instance of the data context. The last thing I'm going to bring in here is the fact that we can have multi-level relationships. So sometimes you can't relate data to the main data selection in the universe through a single through one table. In other words, you can't relate one table to another directly, meaning you have to go through some middle layer. So in order to accommodate that, we can actually relate data contexts to data contexts. So a good example of that is in Service Manager, the related items. So you can't relate an interaction to an incident directly. There's a table that sits in between those two that defines those relationships. So this, what we see here, this is how it would work in that case. This would be this here would be your interaction data. This would be that central table, that relationship table that relates the interaction to the incident. And then, of course, that would bring the data in. And we can even do things like we can hide this. So if this isn't something that, we want to actually see in the universe, we don't have to see it. We can see this, the main incident data, and then the related interaction data. This is in there doing its job, joining the two together, but we don't have to see it. So these three objects together, the data selection, the universe, and the data context, they basically allow us to relate data from multiple tables in the source into a single universe in any way that we need to. And I want to show you one other diagram here before we move on. Let me see. There we go. Okay. I just want to show you this one last slide before we move on, so that you can get an idea of how this relationship is set up within the universe. So basically, instead of showing all the pieces separate, I've tried to overlay them to show how the relationship works. So the large orange rectangle is our universe. We have our single main data selection within that universe, which is found here. And then we want to relate other data to it through a data context. So that's what we have here. And then, of course, that data context is built on top of a data selection, which is what we see here. So ultimately, we're making this data, or we're relating this data to this data through a data context. And you could even say that this gray arrow represents the join here. And then just to show how we can have multiple levels, I've added a second one here so you can see how we've related this data context to this data context, which is then related to the data selection. And of course, as I said earlier, this one can be hidden or not hidden depending on how it needs to be set up. The direction that these arrows point to is kind of important because it illustrates how the join will be set up in the universe. So we use what is called a star architecture. And what that means is that you have sort of a central table, which would be this data selection. And then all other data that's joined to this table sort of orbits around it, I guess you could say. And so what that means is that the precedence, whenever there's a join, precedence is going to be given to this data selection here, which means that if I had data from this data selection and this data selection in my query in Web Intelligence, it's going to show me everything from this one, all the data from this one, and then any related records that it can find from this one. Instead of instead of only showing instances where there is related data, it's going to give me everything here, and then anything that has related data over here we'll see, but we'll also see those records that don't have related data. So that means that this side always gets precedence, and that would work outward. So when we have a situation like the one down here, again, we're going to get everything here, and then any related records that are here. And then similarly, this join right here is going to return everything here, and then whatever is related here. So it sort of works outward from the center, if this were the center.
Jason, we have a question about universes. Do you want it now, or would you like it at the end? It's about data context in universes.
How many relations can be used in a single universe? As many as you need. There's no limitation. So if the question is how many data selections or how many data contexts can be included in a universe, there is no limit on that. So as many as is needed to, to satisfy the requirements of the report developers. Yeah. Okay. So that's all I have as far as slides go. So let's get out of the slides. Okay. So this is, as you can see, still called Report Enterprise Manager, but in a future build, it's going to change to Data Designer. But this is probably an interface that people in this session are familiar with already. So as I said before, we have our three pieces: our data selection, our data context, and our universe. So what we're going to do here to illustrate these concepts is build up a very small incident universe with a couple related data contexts. So the first thing I need to do is I need to build a data selection on the table that holds incident data. Now I don't have one right now, so I'm going to click on New. And what I get is a list of all the tables that are available to me in my source database. I know that in Service Manager, the table that holds incidents is called prob summary. So I type that in, and it finds it in the list for me. And I click OK. And now it's going to create a new data selection for me. It added the incident ID automatically because that is the primary key for this table. So now I want to add a few more fields to this data selection. I want more than just the incident ID in my universe and in my reporting database. So I'm going to click on Fields. And here, as I said, instead of having to type in the name of the field or know the name of the field, we get a list. So this is everything that's available. And you can see what's selectable and what's not selectable. So let's go ahead and add a few things. So let's add, we want the title and the description. So if I type DESC, that actually finds both the title and the description because the label or the caption for description contains DESC, and the name of the field for title also contains DESC. So this search feature is very useful in that it allows you to easily narrow your list, especially when you've got a very long list of fields to look at that are not in any particular order. They're not alphabetized. They're basically in the order that they are in the source. So having a search is quite is a powerful little tool. You'll notice that for description, since this is a Service Manager data source, I've got two options here. Description is actually stored as an array. So every time if you're typing in the description of an incident, every time you hit the Enter key to go to a new line, that actually starts a new element in the array. But we don't want the data to come back like that. We don't want our description to be split, or we don't want our description to span multiple records for a single incident. We want it to appear the same way it does in the Service Manager application, all in one field. So this other option is provided here to allow for that. So by checking this box as opposed to this box, I'm choosing the concatenated version where it's going to take every element in the array and string them all together into a single field. So I've now selected my description and my title. I need a few more fields. I'm going to look for a field called sysmod time. In Service Manager, sysmod time is a date time value that tells me the last time this incident was updated. The reason that I want this, and in any data source, we hope that a similar date timestamp is available because this speeds up the ETL process, and I'll explain that a little more later on. So that's why I'm including sysmod time. It's going to help the ETL. So in addition to that, I want a few other dates and names. I want to know when the incident was opened. I want to know who opened it. And similarly, I want to know when it was closed and who closed it. So I've now selected all my fields. If I undo this, I can actually scroll through and see the green check marks. There was one. There's a couple more. So these are all selected. I'm going to click OK. And it's now asking me, do I want to use sysmod time as the sync date field? And the answer to this question is yes, in this case. What I've just told it is that I want it to use this date timestamp of sysmod time to determine when an incident was last updated, so that it can, when the ETL runs, it will only load those records that have been modified since the last time the ETL ran. So without a date field that tells us when it was last updated, we have to reload the whole table every time the ETL runs. That could be, not a big deal or a big deal depending on how much data is in there. If there's only 100 records in the table, no big deal. If there's, 50,000, then it's a bigger deal. So whenever we can, we want to make sure that we are including a date field that we can use to facilitate that batch load, that incremental load. So you can see I've got a couple red X's here. It's telling me that there's information still needs to be provided. And then up here, this is telling me that the data selection is currently invalid, and that's a direct result of these items not being complete. So what it wants me to do for these is provide a group name. And the group name is going to determine what folder or class the object winds up in the universe when it's generated. So I want this one in freeform text. This is a pick list, by the way. It's a fixed list of groups. You can't change the out-of-the-box groups, but you can add groups to it. That's something that we would get to in a later session, but just so you know, you do have to pick from this list, but this list can be added to. So incident ID is going to be freeform text. Open by is a person, so I'm going to put it in the persons group. You'll notice that open time, I didn't have to do that. Since it sees that the open time is a date, it automatically puts it in the dates group for me. Things like dates will do that, and numbers. Anything that's a numeric value will automatically go into the numbers group. If I wanted to put it in a different group, I could, but in this case, the default group is fine. Close by is, of course, another person. Description is more freeform text, and title is more freeform text. Okay, so all of those are done. I don't see any more issues here. Before I save this, I'm just going to quickly review the properties of this data selection. There's obviously things I can't change here, but there are a few things that I can and do want to change. One is the target table name. In the reporting database, instead of using these sort of nondescript table names that the Service Manager database uses, I'd rather it be more descriptive of what's actually in the table. So I'm going to call this incidents in my reporting database. I can also give it a group name. This has no effect on the resulting ETL reporting database or universe. All this does is allow you to group together your various data selections. So since incidents are a main entity in Service Manager, I'm going to put this in the main entities group. So again, this group name is just helps you organize your data selections, data contexts, and universes within Data Designer. You can see here, because I answered yes to that question earlier, the sync date field is sysmod time. If it were something else, I would be able to change it, but in this case, I do want sysmod time. If you cannot, if there is no date on which to sync, then this can be left blank, and the batch loading must be changed to false, which will basically tell it there's no batch loading, there's no incremental load. It just has to reload the entire table every time. These two settings I'm going to leave as is for now. You rarely have to change the batch size or the default last sync date. So with all these things done, one more thing, I'm going to rename it. I'm going to give it a better name, incidents, and now I'm going to save it. And now that I've saved it, you can see it turns green, tells me everything is good. I am done. So I now have a data selection for my incidents. That means that Data Designer will set up a table or tables in the reporting database and set up the ETL to load the data. But my end users still can't access the data because it's not in any existing universe. So again, that's the next step. So I'm going to create a new universe here. Right now I have none. My list is empty. So I'm going to create a brand new universe. And I have another, I have two data selections available. This one I created earlier. But we're going to create, we're going to use the incidents data selection to create our incident universe. Okay, so it immediately shows me a list of all of the fields that are in my data selection. And I can easily say put everything in my universe by clicking on select all. In this case, there is one field that I don't necessarily want in my universe, and that is sysmod time. If it is something that you want in there, you can absolutely leave it, but if you recall, we added this field primarily to facilitate the batch loading. So we don't necessarily need to add it to the universe if we don't want it to be available in the universe. So I can uncheck it. So that is one scenario where you may want something in the data selection but not in the related universe or dated context. Another example that we'll see in a later session is situations where we are deriving data or creating calculated values from data in the source database, and we want the calculated value but not the original data that was used to create it. So those are other situations where we would include them in the data selection but not the universe. So I'll click OK. It will add all of these in, and you can see based on the groupings that we chose in the data selection, it has put them into the appropriate folder: freeform text, persons, and dates. Since these are dates, you'll notice that it's got this slightly different icon, this green. It's actually like a gear if you can look at it closely enough. What that tells me is that rules have been applied. Anytime we add a date, it automatically adds the rule to it that will create all those various date formats like a year, month name, month number, week number, day number, etc., and all of the predefined conditions like close time and last X full months. We only have to map in the date once here in Data Designer, and by applying the rule, it will create the multiple formats and the predefined conditions for us in the resulting universe. But at this level, we just see that the rule has been applied. And again, rules are something that are going to be covered in more detail in a later session. So a couple other things I can change here. Entity name, that's fine. Actually, I'm just going to make it singular. In this case, this is going to be the name of my universe. This is the name that the universe will have in Business Objects. I want it to be called SMI Incident Management. I could add a grouping for universes. We typically don't add a grouping, but the functionality is there. Usually you only have a list of about, anywhere between 5 and 10 universes, so grouping is not really necessary, but you could if you wanted to. Again, it has no impact on the generated ETL database or universe. This is strictly something that's used inside Data Designer. Okay. So I can save this, and now I have, if I were to apply all the changes I've made, I would now have a universe with these 7 fields, and of course all of the various formats for these in my universe. But I want more data. I want to know more information about the person who opened and closed the incident. So for that, I need the operator data. If I leave here quickly, you'll see that I've already created a data selection for operators. So here's my data selection for operators. It's going to go in the operators table. And I've also created a data context, which is what's in the center here. So if I click open, I can choose my DC operator data context. And you'll notice that the interface for modifying a data context is exactly like a universe. So making changes to a data context is functionally the same as making changes to a universe. The difference, of course, is that a data context gets inserted into a universe and doesn't actually become a universe itself. So this is the data context that I've already set up for operator. These are all the objects that are within it. So now let's go back into our universe. And let's map it in. So again, we've got two persons. So I'm going to click on related data context, and then I'm going to right click on it and choose add relation. And it shows me a list of all my data contexts, of which I only have one. So I'm going to click OK. It's now added to the list. The green folder tells me this is a related data context. So I can expand it and see all the fields that are within it. And when I click on the data context itself, I get some properties over here that need to be configured. So the first thing I want to do is change the relation behavior to group by. And I want it in the persons group. So just like these objects are in the persons folder, I want this whole data context to go into the persons folder. A couple other things I need to set up down here are the prefix and the relation name. Most of the time these are the same. In this case we're going to do closed by first. So the prefix is going to be closed by. And the relation name is going to be closed by. The relation name, which we see here, is basically, again, this is sort of an internal only thing. It just changes the name here, so we know now that this data selection is referring, or this data context, I'm sorry, is referring to the closed by person. So that's all that tells me. That's just sort of for my own sanity. The prefix actually determines how it's going to look in the universe. So what this means is that all of these objects are going to be put into a folder called closed by, and the words closed by are going to be appended to the left side of the object name. So this will become closed by email. This will become closed by login name. And that will become very important in a minute when I add another data context. The last thing we have to do is define the relationship. So, of course, we need to tell it how to relate this operator data to the incident data to get more information about the closed by person. So I click on this little button here. I click add to add a join. And then I just pick the two fields that should be equal. So field 1 is coming from my incident data. So it should be the closed by person. And field 2 is going to be the name. I click OK, and it tells me closed by equals name. So I've defined my join. I can save that. But now I need the same thing for opened by. So again, I'm going to click on add relation. And I'm going to use the same data context. And it shows it again. So now I have two instances. Again, I'm going to change this to group by and change this to persons. In this case, I want it to be opened by, and we're just going to copy that and paste it here, and then we're going to define our join. So I'm going to click add, and it's going to be opened by equal to login name. Okay. And again, you see the same list of fields there. And the fact that I gave them different names and different prefixes is going to allow us to understand in the universe which objects are related to which person up here. Okay, so I've made all the changes I need to in Data Designer. So I can close this. Now, before I do anything else, let's just quickly take a look at our reporting database. It's this one right here, SMI DB HPSM. I have no tables. I have no stored procedures. And in this folder, I have nothing. This is my little magic trick here. So I'm showing you that there's nothing up my sleeve. Okay. So now we're going to go to Project Generate. And I'm going to choose to generate everything. So based on the model that's in Data Designer, I want to update my database, I want to update my ETL, and I want to update my SMI Incident Management Universe. Start. And so now it's just doing some checks and validations, and then once it's satisfied that the model is good, it's going to go ahead and actually push those changes out. So right now it's actually, you can see it's connecting to business objects. And it's done. Completely finished. So now let's go back and look at our database again. So let's refresh it, and then when I expand tables, now you can see the tables. So based on the data selections that I set up, it created these 4 tables to store the incident and operator data. And again, this is these tables up here for batch loading. We have some other tables that store some other data about the environment. But what's key really here are these 4 tables. These 4 tables were generated with these columns based on what I configured in the data selections. And if I make changes to those data selections and regenerate, it will alter these tables accordingly. So I never have to come in here and do anything directly. My ETL is found in the stored procedures. So all these stored procedures that we see here are what make up the ETL process, the process that will load data and update data in the reporting database. And to actually run the ETL, this stored procedure here, the one that ends in _all, is the one that we invoke. So when we run this, it uses all the other stored procedures in the proper order to load the data or update the data. So that's what happened to our database and our ETL when we generated from Data Designer. The other thing it did, of course, is it created an incident management universe for us. So I can open this up. And if I look here on the left, I can see the universe that I just generated. And again, based on everything we just did, everything we just set up in Data Designer is what drove this. So you can see, of course, here's our freeform text fields. They're pretty straightforward. Our dates, remember how we had those rules applied? So that's what caused us to get all of the various formats and the predefined conditions for both open and close time. And then down below, of course, we have our open by and closed by person. And then these 2 folders that we see here are a result of relating the operator data context. So because I did that, I got this closed by folder. And then under closed by freeform text, you can see closed by login name, closed by email. And then if I expand open by, basically the same objects, but with a slightly different name because the join is different. This one is getting the information for the open by person, and these, of course, are getting the information for the closed by person. And if you really want to, you can actually get an idea of how all those joins were set up. I can click on this Arrange Tables. And there we go. So you can kind of get an idea of how it set up all the joins. So all of these joins that we see here represented by these lines were set up by Data Designer when we generated the universe. So all of that stuff is done for you and is maintained for you because, again, if this was an existing universe and I had regenerated it, it would look at the existing universe and then change whatever needed to be changed based on what I had done in Data Designer. So at this point, the last step for those of you who have experience with this would know is to export this to business objects, and then your end users can use it. But we don't need to do that step here. That concludes the material that I have. So at this point, I guess we should see if there are any questions in the queue. will troubleshooting be covered in a future conference? So by troubleshooting, I'm assuming you mean troubleshooting the data load, or troubleshooting issues within Data Designer. As far as troubleshooting issues within Data Designer, we do have 2 more sessions on that. None of them are specifically geared toward troubleshooting, but I think it will be covered sort of as a part of that. If I go back to here, let me share my screen one more time. And let's go back into Data Designer here. Remember that we were being told by Data Designer when something was broken or not broken. So when you're within Data Designer, let's actually go into incidents and let's break it. Let's say that this has no group. Okay, so that breaks it, right? And I save it, and so we can now see it's broken here, and we can see it's broken here. As long as we can see that it's broken here, we can dig into that. I can click on this, or actually I can click on the validation tab, and it will show me where the what is invalid. So in this case, it's really easy because this icon changed as well, so I can zoom right in on it. But there are some issues where that's not the case. And in those cases, we can come over to this data and find out specifically what is wrong. This really comes in handy too if your source data changes. So let's say that there's a field that was mapped in SMI and that field got removed from the source application. This Data Designer will let you will easily identify where that change happened so that you can react to it. You can either tell them, hey, we were using that, please put it back, or okay, that field is no longer in use, we need to remove it from the model. So this validation tab is very handy for that purpose. And it's also real easy to see at a high level where you might have issues in your model just by looking at the list. So you can see even at this level, it's changed from green to red so that we know there's an issue. Now, if you're talking about troubleshooting in the ETL, that would be a little different. I'm not sure if we have a webinar scheduled for that right now, but that would be a good topic for a webinar, especially since in SMI 12 we have we've actually included components that are specific to tracing issues in the data load and solving them. So yes, that should be, if it isn't right now, that should be added as a future session. I hope that answers your question, John. I see another question here. Where is the impact if I modify the universe without using SMI? Excellent question. If you make changes to the universe outside of Data Designer and then at some point in the future use Data Designer to update that universe, it will remove anything that is not that it does not have in its model. So if I go into the universe directly and add an object but don't add it to the universe in Data Designer, the next time I refresh or regenerate that universe from Data Designer, that object will be removed because it sees it and says, this isn't in my model, I'm taking it out. So you don't want to make if you want the full benefits of Data Designer, you don't want to make any changes directly to the database, the ETL, or the universes. And as far as I know, most everything that you would need to do in an SMI universe can be done through Data Designer. We really just skimmed the surface today, so we're going to talk in more detail in the future about setting up custom rules, which are very powerful, mapping additional fields, creating custom fields. So there's a lot more to it that we still have to get to. But at this point, I just wanted to cover the basics of the data selection, data context, and universe. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and have a great day. Bye-bye.